Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. Today, we're looking at a collection of old photographs that seem perfectly ordinary at first. But the longer you look, the more it feels like someone inside them is looking back at you. The Extra Guest, Hartford, Connecticut, winter 1907. They said the photograph was taken after supper, when the lamps were lowered and the piano lid left open to cool. Clara's dress still carries the soft folds from sitting too long, and Edwin's hands rest at her waist with familiar certainty. It appears to be a simple anniversary portrait. Yet Clara's eyes are not on him. They drift left, toward the small table where a vase of flowers blurs into shadow. Beside that table, a second figure gathers, thin as smoke, shaped like a man waiting to be addressed. The photographer later claimed the air felt crowded, though only 2 people stood before the lens. Edwin had died the previous January, and Clara insisted on marking the date as always. When the print arrived, family spoke of her pallor and his affectionate pose. No one explained the shadow by the table, or why Clara's hand trembles as if greeting someone who arrived early and never sat down. The Woman Who Waited by the Chair, Newport, Rhode Island, autumn 1899. The room was photographed in the afternoon, when the chandeliers were unlit and the tall windows let in a patient, polite light. Chairs stand where they were last used, angled slightly toward one another, as if a conversation had paused rather than ended. On the left side, near the small table and the potted palm, a pale figure gathers in the blur, no sharper than breath on glass. At first, it resembles a woman adjusting her dress, late for joining the others. The family portraits above the fireplace remain calm, properly arranged, watching nothing. Records say the house belonged to Margaret Hale, who died quietly of fever one October and was never photographed in the room again. Yet when the image was developed, the caretaker noticed the shape by the chair, facing inward. It stands where Margaret always waited, listening for footsteps that never came, careful not to sit until she was invited. The Small Devotion, San Antonio, Texas, summer 1934. The wall had been white once, before the heat lifted its paint in thin, tired curls. Someone arranged the objects carefully at the base. 2 wooden crosses, a chipped frame, a glass jar turned on its side, as if it had rolled there and chosen to stay. It looks like a child's attempt at order, something done quietly while the adults slept. Inside the frame, the figure appears calm, almost kind, its eyes lowered as though listening. Neighbors said this corner belonged to Rosa Delgado, who prayed there each morning after her husband died in the quarry. When the house was abandoned, everything else was taken, yet this was left behind. The photograph was meant to document the damage, not the devotion. Later, when it was developed, someone noticed the faint shape rising from the wall itself, pale and unfinished, as if Rosa had stepped back only halfway. The crosses remain upright, waiting for her to finish. The Second Exposure, Albany, New York, spring 1878. The portrait was meant to be respectable, the sort of woman sent to relatives who worried she might never marry. Eleanor Whitcomb sits properly, hands folded, her dress dark and carefully fastened at the throat. Her expression is patient, almost practiced. Behind her, the background should have remained empty, softened by the long exposure. Instead, another woman gathers there, pale and slightly misaligned, her face tilted in quiet attention. Studio notes record that Eleanor's older sister, Margaret, died 3 months earlier of pneumonia and had been photographed in the same chair years before. Eleanor insisted on using the same room, the same hour of day. When the plate was developed, the photographer assumed a technical error and offered a retake. Eleanor declined. She said the image was finally correct. Family members later noticed that Eleanor's gaze does not meet the camera. It lifts, just slightly, toward the woman behind her, as if waiting for approval before she stands. The one who never stood. Prairie Creek Chapel, Kansas. Late morning, 1912. The photograph was taken between services, when the chapel had time to breathe. Sunlight rests neatly along the pews, and the pulpit waits with its plain, patient face. Everything is in order. Hymn boards are set. The cross hangs straight. Nothing appears disturbed. Only in the center aisle, just behind the third pew, something soft interrupts the air. It looks like a person rising, or perhaps failing to rise, caught mid-decision. The caretaker, Samuel Rowe, said one woman always sat there alone, arriving early and leaving before anyone spoke to her. Her name was Lydia Marsh, and she drowned the previous spring when the river took its turn too fast. The day this photograph was made, Samuel insisted the church was empty. Later, when he saw the image, he noticed the shape faced the pulpit, but never quite reached its feet, as if still waiting for the final hymn that would tell her when to stand. The room that was never empty. St. Louis, Missouri. Late evening, 1946. The photograph was taken for inventory. Nothing more than a record of a storage room beneath the old building. Bare bulbs hang from thin wires, giving off a tired light that settles into the cracks of the walls. The floor shows dark stains where crates once stood, their shapes still faintly remembered. At first glance, the room appears vacant, scrubbed of purpose. Then the longer you look, the more the air seems occupied. Near the back wall, just left of center, a pale figure gathers where the dampness is thickest, as if the room itself is exhaling. Building logs mention a night watchman named Thomas Keller, dismissed after insisting someone remained downstairs after closing. He died quietly of pneumonia that winter. When this photograph was developed, the clerk assumed moisture had marked the print. Later, someone noticed the shape aligns perfectly with where Thomas claimed a man stood, waiting patiently every night for the door to be unlocked again. The third furnace was warm. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, dawn, 1921. The photograph was taken to show efficiency. A row of furnaces standing open like obedient mouths, each with its own tools set neatly below. Ash lay where it always did, pale and ordinary, swept into corners that remembered the night shift. The caretaker, Frank Barlow, said he shut them all down at midnight, counted twice, and locked the doors. In the picture, the left and right chambers rest as expected, their interiors dull and finished. The middle one does not. It holds a darker scatter, arranged as if recently tended, and the metal beneath it looks faintly warm. Frank insisted he had not returned. Records note a woman named Elsie Klein, whose service was delayed by paperwork and grief, waiting overnight in the adjoining room. When the plate was developed, the supervisor dismissed the difference as timing, a trick of heat and light. Later, someone noticed the ash in the center chamber forms a shallow curve, like a place made for someone who lay down carefully and rose before being called. The one who learned her face. Willow Creek Meadow, Oregon. Late summer, 1916. The photograph was meant to be playful. A quiet afternoon captured while the light softened and the grass bent politely around her knees. Evelyn Moore leans forward, as if listening to something small and private, her eyes lowered, her mouth almost smiling. A web stretches between the stems beside her, thin and exact, holding the moment together. Only later does the left side begin to trouble the eye. There, just behind her arm, a smaller face appears, pale and intent, its features echoing Evelyn's own, but reduced, unfinished. Local records mention Evelyn's younger sister Clara, who died at 7 after wandering into the fields alone. They say Evelyn often spoke to someone while walking, pausing to answer questions no one else heard. When the photograph was developed, the photographer blamed double exposure. Evelyn did not argue. She only asked for a second print, explaining that Clara had finally learned how to look like her and wanted proof she was getting it right. The gardener who stayed outside. Savannah, Georgia. Early morning, 1924. The conservatory was photographed to show how well the plants had survived the winter. Mr. Alcott stands neatly among the pots, his jacket pressed, his hat settled as if he has just come in to inspect the leaves. Sunlight filters through the glass with a mild, forgiving glow. Everything inside appears carefully tended. Only the windows trouble the eye. Beyond the panes, among the vines pressed flat against the glass, a pale shape lingers, roughly human, its outline broken by stems and shadow. It seems to be watching the room rather than entering it. Estate records mention a groundskeeper named Henry Pike. Dismissed after a fall left him limping and slow. He died the following spring and was buried near the outer wall. When the photograph was returned, Mr. Alcott remarked that the garden finally looked balanced again. He did not explain why he had locked the doors, or why the figure outside stands exactly where Henry once waited each morning, hoping to be let back in. The woman who would not sit alone. Concord, Massachusetts, evening, 1869. The portrait was arranged to show Mrs. Abigail Frost as she preferred to be remembered. Upright, hands folded neatly, lace pinned with care. Her bonnet frames her face tightly, as if holding her in place. The table beside her is set with nothing but a single candle, unlit, its wick trimmed and waiting. She looks stern but calm, a woman accustomed to silence. Only after time does the background begin to soften strangely. Behind her chair, a second presence gathers, faint and unfinished, its head tilted toward her shoulder in quiet reliance. Studio records note that Abigail's husband, Samuel, died the winter before and was never photographed. She requested no retakes, even when the photographer mentioned a blur. When the image was delivered, neighbors said she looked comforted, almost relieved. No one could explain why Abigail never sat at home without placing an empty chair directly behind her, or why she insisted it was already occupied. The weight she carried. Northern New Mexico. Late afternoon, 1911. The photograph was taken quickly, before the light slipped behind the adobe wall. The woman stands to the left, shawl drawn close, her dress falling straight to the dust, as it always had. At first, she appears merely tired, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the camera. Only when the image is studied longer does the fabric of her skirt begin to trouble the eye. Along the folds near her knees, a faint shape gathers, too defined to be shadow, too soft to be cloth. It resembles a small figure clinging there, its face pressed outward, as if looking through her. Local accounts mention that her first child, Isabel, died years earlier after falling ill during harvest season. Since then, the woman was known to pause often, hands resting on her skirt, whispering as though answering questions. When the photograph was developed, the men spoke only of Mateo. No one mentioned the figure on the dress, or why the woman's posture suggests she is balancing more than her own weight, careful not to let what hangs there slip free. The one who walked home. Later, Black Forest, Germany. Autumn, 1909. The photograph was taken to mark a good harvest. Anna Bauer stands turned slightly, smiling with the mild pride of a woman carrying more than she expected. The turkey hangs heavy in her arms, feathers still catching the light, its weight pulling her gently forward. The trees behind her crowd close, orderly and familiar. Only after time does the path begin to feel too long. Behind Anna, just left of the fence, a pale figure stands where the ground darkens, its dress faintly outlined, its face blurred by patience. Records say Anna's younger sister, Liesel, followed her into the woods years earlier and never returned. The family stopped speaking her name, but Anna continued to set an extra plate each evening. When the photograph was developed, neighbors laughed at the odd blur and praised Anna's strength. No one asked why she is already turning her body homeward, or why she looks certain someone else will arrive later, carrying nothing at all. The measure they forgot. Humboldt County, California. Early morning, 1903. The photograph was taken to show the scale of the redwood, nothing more. Two men balance on narrow planks, pulling the measuring line tight, their boots planted with practiced care. The forest behind them stands quietly, patient and old, letting the work proceed. At first, the trunk appears solid, uninterrupted, its bark dark and deeply scored. Only after a moment does the center begin to thin. There, pressed into the grain of the tree, a pale figure rises, narrow and upright, as if the wood itself has learned the shape of a man. Logging records mention a surveyor named Daniel Price, who vanished in these woods the year before. Last seen marking trees alone at dawn, the men said they felt the line resist, as though caught on something soft. When the photograph came back, they blamed fog and motion. No one explained why the figure stands exactly where the tape tightens most, or why the tree seems to hold its breath, careful not to let him go. The rocking chair that remembered. Athens, Ohio. Late afternoon, 1914. The photograph was taken to capture a quiet moment before supper, when the porch still held the day's warmth. Emma Caldwell sits in her rocking chair with her hands folded, her dress light and sensible, her shoes placed neatly on the boards. She looks directly at the camera, calm in the way of someone accustomed to waiting. The house behind her stands open and ordinary, nothing hidden. Only the chair begins to trouble the eye. Beneath it, along the curve of its runners, a pale blur stretches downward, shaped like legs that never quite reach the floor. Neighbors later said Emma continued to rock long after her illness confined her indoors. She died that winter, but the chair was never moved. When the photograph was developed, the family spoke of a flaw in the plate, a trick of motion and light. No one explained why the chair appears to be rocking anyway, or why Emma's posture suggests she is still making room for someone gently rising beneath her, careful not to disturb the boards. The chair that was still warm. Bloomington, Indiana. Evening, 1918. The room was photographed to show it in good order, ready for guests who never arrived. Chairs are drawn politely toward the table, the lamp trimmed and waiting, the curtains falling just where they should. Nothing looks disturbed. Only the light seems to hesitate. Near the table, one chair holds a faint presence, as if someone has only just stood and not yet decided to leave. The air there appears thicker, slightly bowed, remembering a shape. Family letters mention that Mrs. Eleanor Finch liked to sit in that spot after supper, her hands folded, listening to the clock in the next room. She died quietly one autumn night while the house was full of people who did not notice. When the photograph was developed, they blamed reflection and shadow. No one explained why the chair closest to the table appears pushed back, or why the room feels arranged around someone who has simply stepped away for a moment and intends to return. The Girl Who Did Not Come Out. Pike County, Missouri. Late summer, 1905. The photograph was taken to show the house newly finished. Its boards straight, the fence still holding its shape. Lillian Hart stands at the gate in a clean white dress, one hand resting where the latch should have been fixed. She looks steady, almost practiced, as if she has been asked to wait there before. The porch behind her is shaded and quiet. A chair pushed back just enough to suggest someone rose recently. Only when the eye drifts to the doorway does the picture begin to thin. Inside the dark frame, a smaller figure gathers, pale and childlike, its face hovering at knee height, watching Lillian from the threshold. Family letters say Lillian's younger sister, Ruth, died of fever the previous winter and was never carried outside again. When the photograph was developed, neighbors praised Lillian's composure and the fine new fence. No one mentioned the figure inside the house, or why Lillian's hand grips the wood as if she is keeping the door gently closed. The seat that stayed assigned. Dayton, Ohio, autumn 1969. The photograph was taken after the bell, when the classroom had settled into its late afternoon quiet. Desks line up obediently, their metal legs catching the fluorescent light. Susan Miller sits near the front, hands resting on the desktop, her notebook closed as if she is already finished. She looks toward the camera with the faint unease of someone who has been called back for a reason not yet explained. Behind her, the room appears empty, orderly, prepared for tomorrow. Only after a moment does the air beside her desk seem occupied. A pale blur gathers there, pressed close to her chair, shaped like a student leaning in to whisper. School records mention a girl named Karen Holt, who transferred out mid-semester after falling ill and never returned to class. Susan later said she felt crowded that day, as if someone else had been assigned the same seat. When the photo was developed, the teacher blamed reflection and poor focus. No one asked why Susan never moved her chair again, or why she kept leaving space beside her, careful not to sit too far to the left. The passenger who didn't board. Liverpool Harbor, spring 1906. The photograph was taken on the deck just before departure, meant to mark a long-planned journey. Thomas and Edith Whitmore stand close, dressed properly for travel. The railings neat behind them, the ropes already coiled with purpose. Edith's skirt falls heavy and dark, pressed smooth for the occasion. At first glance, it is a respectable portrait, the kind sent home with a postcard promise. Only after time does the fabric begin to feel unsettled. Low on Edith's dress, near the hem, a small face gathers in the shadow, pale and watching, as if looking out through water. Ship records note that the Whitmore's youngest daughter, Alice, died the winter before and was buried the week their tickets were purchased. Edith insisted on traveling anyway. When the photograph was developed, Thomas remarked that Edith looked thinner than he remembered. No one explained why she kept her hand clenched in the folds of her skirt, or why she later said the crossing felt crowded, even in open air. The berth that was already taken, North Atlantic, aboard RMS Titanic. Night, April 1912. The photograph was taken below deck, where the machinery hummed softly and the air smelled of oil and sleep. A young steward lies on his narrow bunk, hands folded over the blanket, his face calm in the way of someone finally off duty. Pipes run neatly overhead. A ladder waits without urgency. Everything looks arranged for rest. Only the space above him feels unsettled. Near the ceiling, between the shadows of valves and beams, a second shape gathers. Long and pale, pressed flat as if learning how to fit there. Ship records list a fireman named William Harper, assigned to this section, who failed to report after midnight. The steward later said he woke briefly, feeling crowded, as though someone had climbed in without touching him. When the photograph was developed, the officers dismissed the blur as steam and reflection. No one explained why the berth above remained empty for the rest of the voyage, or why the steward insisted on sleeping with the light on, certain someone else was still awake, waiting for morning that would never quite arrive. The third sister, New Haven, Connecticut. Winter, 1893. The photograph was taken in the front parlor, where the curtains were kept drawn to protect the furniture. The two girls sit close together on the bench, their dresses identical, their hair brushed with careful symmetry. They were known for this, for doing everything the same way, answering questions with matching nods. At first, the image seems only softly blurred, the kind of imperfection common to winter light. Then the left side begins to trouble the eye, near the edge of the frame, low and unfinished. A smaller figure appears, its face pale and expectant, as if waiting to be called into place. Family records mention a third sister, Eleanor, who died at 4 and was never spoken of again. When the photograph was delivered, their mother remarked how grown the girls looked, how complete. No one asked why the hem of the dress trailed so long, or why the sisters lean inward, making room for someone who never learned where to sit. If these photographs made you uneasy, it's probably because you noticed something that doesn't belong. Faces that weren't meant to be there. Figures that never quite left. History isn't always silent. Sometimes it waits inside old images. If you saw a detail I didn't mention, leave it in the comments. I want to know what caught your eye. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because some photos reveal more the longer you look.